The world shimmered into focus with a jolt of air and static as Reese Calder dropped from the transport beam and landed hard on the moss-covered forest floor. His boots sank slightly into the damp ground, and the towering, broad-leafed trees of Drava loomed overhead like ancient sentinels. A thick humidity clung to his skin, and the scent of decay and pollen clashed in the heavy air. He knelt automatically and patted down his suit. The combat-grade fabric was intact, but every piece of standard-issue gear was missing. No sidearm, no scanner, no fire starter. His wrist module, which normally flickered with a blue HUD, was simply gone. He expected this. The simulation was designed for chaos. The instructors had made it clear. No technology, no weapons, no assistance. Survival would depend on what cadets could make with their hands and what they remembered from lectures most of them never paid attention to. Reese had. He stood and turned in a slow circle, cataloging the surroundings. Trees thick enough to hide predators, vines hanging in loops, bark that looked peelable, large stones scattered like broken teeth at the edge of a dry stream bed. This place would test every nerve. Good. Cracks of light blinked in the canopy as others dropped in. The first arrival landed hard and shouted in panic before rolling to his feet. A Grelk male, tall and rubbery-skinned, cursed in his native tongue and slapped the side of his bald head where his neural implant used to be. Another pulse of energy signaled the arrival of a four-eyed Eryxian female who hissed and stumbled, clutching her throat as if expecting a breathing mask that was no longer there. Two more dropped within moments, a short, gray-skinned Drenari and a towering Solari male, whose armor plating looked more ceremonial than functional now. The last to arrive was a second Grelk male, probably the first one's sibling, judging by the shared gill pattern and frantic shouting between them. The clearing erupted in disorganized noise. Questions were barked, names shouted, blame thrown. No one had a clue what to do without a device in hand. The Eryxian female immediately attempted to sync to the command grid using voice commands, but nothing responded. The Drenari curled near a tree and muttered to himself, rubbing his temples. The Solari punched the ground in frustration, tearing a clump of moss free and flinging it into the trees. Reese ignored them. He stepped over a rotten log and squatted beside a rock, prying it loose with his bare hands. His fingers bled slightly from the edge, but he didn't stop. He needed stone, dense, flaky, sharp. He needed something he could break and shape. Fire would come next, water after that. Shelter was third. His mind was already building a list, a plan, a method of surviving the next 5 days. While the others fought invisible control panels and shouted for assistance that would never come, he chipped one rock against another and tested the edge. Still too dull. He kept looking. The Grelk brother stalked over, his translucent skin shining with sweat. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Reese didn't look up. Adapting. The Grelk scoffed and motioned to the others. "We need a distress signal. The simulation is malfunctioning. We weren't supposed to be stripped of everything." "It's not malfunctioning," Reese said quietly. "It's working perfectly." The Solari overheard and stomped closer. "You're telling me they expect us to just sit here with nothing? This isn't a challenge. It's a death trap." Reese stood slowly, holding the stone in his hand. "Then learn how not to die." He turned and walked toward a patch of brittle vines twisting around the base of a tree. He pulled a few strands, testing their tensile strength. Not bad. Could work for lashings. He remembered how his father used to tie fishing nets back on the outskirts of the Earth-Mars frontier colony. No tech, just fingers and patience. Reese knotted the first vine strand, then the second, building muscle memory back into his fingertips. Behind him, someone tried starting a fire with wet wood. It fizzled and smoked. A short argument erupted between the Eryxian and the Grelk siblings. Someone suggested splitting up to find a rescue beacon. The Solari growled that predators would be easier to fight in pairs. Reese didn't say anything, Talking was wasting daylight. As the sun sank deeper behind the thick clouds of Drava, the jungle came alive with an unsettling chorus of insect chirps, low growls, and distant cracking branches. Something big moved beyond the tree line. The others paused, their ears twitching and eyes scanning. Reese didn't flinch. He had already spotted the pattern. Large creatures here moved mostly at dusk. The instructors wanted the cadets vulnerable and panicking. The simulation was psychological as much as physical. He dragged a bundle of dry moss and bark shavings back to a clear patch of ground. Using the sharpest edge he'd found, he began scraping sparks from one flint stone against a dense, knobbly piece of metal-stained rock. It took time. His knuckles bruised. The Eryxian came over and watched silently. After his 10th strike, a curl of smoke rose. She gasped and knelt closer. "You did that without a starter?" "Used to do it back home," Reese muttered. "No one gave us tech unless we earned it." She didn't speak again, but she didn't walk away either. As the flame caught and spread to the dry moss, she leaned closer to absorb the heat. One by one, the others followed. By nightfall, the entire group huddled around the small fire Reese had built with his bare hands, watching it like it was the last star in the universe. No one spoke about what they had lost. They only stared at what Reese had made. The Grelk brothers looked uneasy, as if recognizing the shift in balance. The Solari scowled, still too proud to speak, but his eyes were on the flames. The Drenari asked in a quiet voice how Reese had chosen the stones. Reese explained without arrogance, only precision. He didn't seek to lead. He just didn't want to die. Leadership, apparently, came to those who moved while others froze. Beyond the firelight, a deep howl rang out, low and guttural, the kind of sound that made bones tighten and hands tremble. The cadets froze. Reese didn't. "That thing," the Eryxian whispered. It sounded close. "It'll test our defenses," Reese said. "It's programmed to look for isolated targets." The others glanced around. None of them had built shelter. None had fashioned tools. Only Reese had both a sharpened stone and a fire. Only Reese had a plan. He stood, walked to the edge of the firelight, and stared into the trees. The glowing red dots of simulated predator eyes blinked once, then vanished. No one slept well that night. The aliens had trained for years with the best virtual systems the galaxy could offer, but tonight, their tech was gone. Their comfort was gone. And the only reason they weren't already eliminated was because one human had remembered how to use a rock. The second morning on Drava began not with sunlight, but with fog, a thick silver haze that blanketed the jungle floor and muffled every sound. Reese woke first. He hadn't truly slept, only allowed his body to rest while keeping his mind alert. He had counted 4 separate movements in the underbrush during the night. At least one was a decoy drone, another too heavy to be a small animal. Nothing had attacked, but it was only a matter of time. The fire had burned down to a bed of warm embers, which he gently stirred before adding dry moss and fanning it back to life. Behind him, the others slept uneasily, curled in makeshift piles with no shelter. No traps had been set, no perimeter watched. Reese had offered instructions the night before, but no one had moved. He no longer expected them to. He walked away from the camp with a stone blade in hand, slipping silently through the fog-covered foliage. His boots made little noise on the wet leaves. Every step was deliberate. He wasn't foraging blindly. He was hunting, not for food, not yet, but for something he could use. Bones, maybe. Vine clusters. Anything sharp or hard enough to serve a purpose. The terrain changed as he moved deeper into the valley. The trees here were taller, older. The ground sloped into a hollow where the roots of a fallen giant tree sprawled like skeletal fingers. Something had died near it. He smelled it before he saw it. A simulated predator carcass, maybe left from another group's encounter. He crouched beside the bones, careful not to disturb the wet soil too much. The creature had tusks, long, thick, and slightly curved. Useless as is, but perfect if broken and sharpened. Reese selected 2 ribs and 1 tusk, then sat cross-legged and began carving. He didn't rush. His hands moved with a rhythm forged from years of necessity, not training drills. He split the rib down the center using a flat rock and then ground one edge against a slab of darker stone until it tapered to a jagged point. The tusk took more work. It cracked unevenly, but he smoothed the sides until it could be used as a spear tip. He used vine fibers to bind it to a shaft of wood he had stripped on the way in. By the time the fog lifted, he had a functioning short spear, a crude dagger, and 2 lengths of sharpened bone he could throw if needed. He rose, stretched his back, and glanced toward the camp. Smoke rose faintly in the distance. At least the fire had survived. He returned slowly, alert. Something had shifted in the jungle while he worked. The silence had changed. Birds had stopped calling. The wind didn't move the leaves the same way. Reese stopped at the edge of the clearing and narrowed his eyes. Nothing visible. But his gut told him something was watching. He stepped into the open and approached the others. The Eryxian female was awake now, crouched beside the fire and rubbing her arms. The Solari paced like a restless beast. The Grelk twins sat close together, whispering and eyeing the shadows. The Drenari hadn't moved. "Stay near the fire today," Reese said, tossing a bundle of sticks into the embers. "We're not alone anymore." The Solari grunted. "I heard movement too." "You sure it's not just the game AI trying to scare us?" Reese looked at him flatly. "Do you want to find out without a weapon in your hand?" The Solari didn't answer. Reese knelt and laid out the tools he had crafted. The others watched in silence as he held up the bone spear. "If anything comes near the camp, this goes into its throat." The Eryxian female leaned forward. "Can you show me how you made that?" He nodded. "Later. First, we build defenses." He directed the others to gather long branches, thick vines, and stones with sharp edges. At first, they hesitated, but when he moved without hesitation, they followed. The fear of the previous night had left cracks in their pride. Now it was survival or elimination. By midday, Reese had helped the Solari erect a low perimeter fence from logs angled outward and reinforced with sharpened sticks. It wouldn't stop a large predator, but it would slow one down. He taught the Eryxian how to lash vine around a rock and tree to create a tension snare. She was slow, but precise. He didn't correct her harshly. She asked questions, and he answered plainly. She picked up fast. While tying a tripwire between 2 trees, he heard a rustle behind him and turned just in time to see the Drenari stumbling toward the stream, dazed and pale. Reese jogged over and caught his arm. "You haven't eaten or drunk anything," Reese said. "I don't know what's safe," the Drenari whispered. Reese pulled out a leaf he had folded into a small pouch and dipped it into the stream. The water wasn't clean, but he had lined the inside of the pouch with a thin layer of charcoal scraped from burned bark. It wasn't perfect, but it would absorb some toxins. He handed it over. "Drink slowly. Don't finish it in one go." The Drenari nodded and obeyed. Reese sat beside him for a moment and looked out across the water. Movement across the far bank made him still. Leaves shifted, just slightly, a shape. Not large, but wrong. Too fluid to be an animal, too precise. A simulation drone? Possibly. He didn't alert the others yet. It hadn't crossed the stream. Back in the camp, progress had begun to take form. The Eryxian had constructed a windbreak wall from fern fronds. One of the Grelk twins, begrudgingly, had begun building a raised sleeping platform with Reese's guidance. Even the Solari admitted that the perimeter felt less exposed. When dusk approached, Reese returned to the root hollow to retrieve more bones, but the carcass was gone. Not entirely. Drag marks remained in the soil, deep and erratic, as though something large had pulled the remains away. He examined the pattern. Not machine, not simulated. This was intentional. Either another cadet group had found it, or something else had taken it. Neither option was comforting. He returned to the camp just before sunset and told the others to keep their tools close and the fire alive through the night. No one questioned him anymore. He took first watch, sitting at the edge of the clearing with the bone spear in his lap. The wind had picked up, carrying a new smell, sweet, almost metallic, artificial. His jaw tightened. Reese knew the instructors were watching. They wanted to see who would break first. But this time, he wasn't worried about the instructors. He was worried about what they had released into the jungle that hadn't been in the mission briefing, and he wasn't sure who would see the next morning still standing. Reese sat completely still, his breath controlled, eyes locked on the tree line beyond the flickering perimeter of firelight. The wind had shifted again, and now that same sweet metallic scent returned, stronger this time. It wasn't just drifting in the air. It was moving. He knew enough about the Academy's simulation methods to understand that certain stimuli, like scent and sound, were intentional triggers. But this was different. It wasn't random. It was following him. Behind him, the others dozed in shifts, too exhausted to question the night watch rotation he had silently set. The Eryxian female had insisted on helping him sharpen 2 more spear tips earlier, and one of the Grelk brothers had even tried copying his lashing technique for a smaller, jagged blade. It wasn't trust, not yet, but something closer to necessity. Still, Reese kept his real weapons close, not out of arrogance, but out of experience. He was the only one who truly believed something was about to strike. An hour into the second watch, he saw the shape. It emerged slowly from behind a thick trunk, not bothering to disguise its form. Quadrupedal, low to the ground, covered in matte plating that shimmered slightly even without light. It moved like a predator, but too mechanically smooth to be organic. One of the newer models, no doubt, advanced training drone, made to mimic animal movement and behavior, but running on silent joints and infrared logic. Reese knew the specs. 30% faster than a real predator, designed to stalk and test reaction speed under full sensory deprivation. Except this time he had firelight and a spear. He didn't move. Not yet. The creature circled once, stopping just beyond the tree line. It studied him without eyes. The moment he raised his weapon, it would charge. He lowered his breathing, letting his muscles stay loose. Then, without warning, it lunged. The sound it made was somewhere between a hiss and a pulse of compressed air. Reese dove sideways, rolled in the dirt, and came up with the spear held low. The drone missed his chest by inches and landed hard, its claws digging into the ground. The others woke with shouts. One of the Grelk brothers stumbled backward, falling into the fire pit and kicking up embers. The Eryxian grabbed a burning stick without hesitation, eyes wide and terrified, but focused. The Solari charged without a weapon, roaring and ready to strike with his bare hands. Reese didn't wait. He moved toward the drone as it recalibrated and drove his spear into its side. The tusk tip cracked, but pierced the outer shell, sending sparks into the air. The machine bucked hard, and Reese was thrown back. He hit the ground but recovered quickly, reaching for the backup bone shard at his belt. The Solari slammed into the drone from behind and locked his arms around its neck plating, holding it in place for a moment. It shrieked electronically and flung him off like dead weight. The Eryxian hurled the burning stick, hitting the creature in the leg. The fire didn't do much, but it confused the sensors. Reese saw the opening and lunged again, this time driving the sharpened rib deep under the drone's shoulder joint. The machine spasmed and collapsed in a metallic twitch. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then the Solari groaned from the dirt, his face twisted in pain. One of the Grelk brothers was bleeding from his forearm. The Eryxian was breathing hard, clutching her side where the impact had grazed her. Reese stood over the sparking remains of the training drone, breathing steady, eyes cold. "That wasn't supposed to be deployed yet," the Eryxian said quietly. "Which means the simulation's changing," Reese answered. He pulled his spear free, snapped off the damaged end, and began carving a new point in silence. The others gathered closer, suddenly aware that the jungle around them had fallen completely quiet. No insects, no birds, as if the island itself had paused. The rest of the night passed without another attack, but none of them slept. By dawn, Reese had instructed the group to disassemble part of the windbreak and use it to reinforce the perimeter fence. He helped the Solari bind his shoulder with strips of bark and moss. The Eryxian tended to the Grelk's bleeding arm. The Drenari, still withdrawn and pale, stayed near the fire, watching but not participating. The attack had done more than injure. It had shifted the group's dynamic. For the first time, no one questioned Reese's decisions. He didn't use the moment to gloat. He used it to teach. He showed the Eryxian how to lash bones tighter with wet vines and dry them in smoke for strength. He guided the Grelk in building a defensive barrier from rocks and thorns. He even handed the Solari a heavy branch and taught him where to strike on a mechanical predator's frame for maximum damage. But he still hadn't solved the biggest problem: food. By midday, the cadets had exhausted the dry rations hidden in their suits, small nutrient tabs barely enough to keep them alert. Water was manageable, thanks to the filtration pouch Reese had crafted, but their energy was dwindling. The jungle teemed with plant life, but none of the cadets could identify what was safe. One of the Grelk had nearly chewed on a spiked fruit before Reese knocked it from his hand and showed him the blistered tree bark nearby. "Plants that bleed red sap are usually reactive to internal acids," he said simply. The Solari grunted. "So what can we eat?" "Nothing we haven't cooked first," Reese replied. He led them back toward the hollow where the carcass had been taken. The drag marks were fainter now, as if the jungle had begun swallowing them, but Reese followed them deep into the underbrush. After nearly an hour, they found another clearing, this one full of broken machine parts and half-devoured mechanical predator bodies. Another group had been here, and lost, no signs of survivors. But scattered among the wreckage were bone fragments and a half-burned pile of strange-looking rodents, simulated wildlife. Someone had hunted. Poorly. But Reese knelt beside the pile, studied the scorch marks, and nodded. The meat hadn't spoiled yet. He took two and wrapped them in broad leaves, tying them shut with vine. Back at the camp, he dug a shallow pit and laid flat stones inside. He built a fire over it and waited until the stones glowed. Then he pulled the embers aside, laid the wrapped meat onto the hot stone, and covered them again. The scent of cooking filled the air. Smoky, rich, unfamiliar. The Grelk brothers hovered close. Even the Drenari crept nearer. Reese served the meat without comment. No one thanked him. They just ate like they hadn't tasted food in days. He watched them for signs of reaction, rash, nausea, dizziness, but none came. The simulation meat was safe. That night, the fog returned, thicker this time. The firelight barely penetrated it. Reese stayed awake longer than usual, listening for the telltale sound of compressed servos in the underbrush. But what he heard instead chilled him more. It was a voice, not words, not language, but a voice, human, whispering from somewhere in the fog. A soft call just outside the camp's edge. He stood slowly and walked toward it, spear in hand. The others were asleep. He moved through the mist until the voice faded. No one was there. No prints, no drones, just jungle. He returned to camp without answers, but with one certainty. This test was no longer about survival. It was about endurance. And whoever had designed this level was watching how close Reese could come to breaking. Reese didn't mention the voice. Not at dawn, not while reinforcing the barricades, not even when the Eryxian female asked if he had heard anything strange during the night. He shook his head and kept working. Whatever had whispered from the fog hadn't returned, but it lingered in his mind like a splinter. His instincts told him it hadn't been part of the official simulation. The instructors wouldn't risk inserting audio hallucinations unless something had gone wrong, or unless someone was interfering with the program. The others had grown quieter. The Solari no longer questioned orders. He had spent the morning sharpening a heavy branch into a club, working in focused silence. The Eryxian had begun collecting leaves and roots under Reese's guidance, learning which combinations could act as mild antiseptics and which ones would knock a person unconscious if consumed raw. Even the Grelk brothers had stopped bickering and begun constructing their own tool set. The Drenari, however, had barely moved. He sat beside the fire with a blank expression, knees pulled to his chest, as if mentally severed from the group. By midday, the sun pierced the canopy for the first time since their arrival, revealing how truly foreign the world was. Towering trees with glassy bark shimmered with hidden moisture. Thorned vines moved slightly even without wind. Every shadow seemed deeper than it should have been, every shape a possible threat. Reese had started recognizing certain calls from the jungle, the echo of a simulated raptor, the buzzing of surveillance drones cloaked to mimic insects, the sharp click of motion-triggered camera roots. But none of that prepared him for what he found near the edge of the southern slope. He had gone scouting alone, as he always did, tracking a trail of disturbed leaves and broken branches. The path led him into a small ravine where the air was cooler and the silence even heavier. In the clearing below, partially hidden by a collapsed tree, was a training pod, not active, not disguised. It had a logo on the side, Galactic Academy Unit 03, and blood, not simulation blood, not the red biogel used to simulate injuries. This was darker, thicker, real. He crouched and touched the dried smear. His fingertips came away sticky. He scanned the surrounding area and found a torn piece of uniform half buried under a root. Burnt edges. No body, no ID tag. Just a boot, melted halfway down the side, and a cracked helmet visor smeared from the inside. Reese stood slowly and backed away, eyes scanning the trees. If a cadet had died here, it meant the simulation was no longer just a test. Something had escalated. And if the system hadn't been shut down after a fatality, then either the instructors were unaware, or they had lost control of the program. He returned to camp quickly, carrying the boot wrapped in a large leaf. When he arrived, the others looked up in alarm. The Eryxian was the first to notice the stain on his sleeve. "Where did that come from?" she asked. "Southern Ravine," he said. "There's a damaged pod down there. Doesn't look like it belonged to anyone from our team." The Grelk brothers exchanged a glance. The Solari rose and took a step closer. "Are you saying someone else died?" "I'm saying there's blood and no comms. No body, but signs of panic. If there was an emergency extraction, it didn't happen cleanly." The Drenari finally spoke, voice thin. "We're still being watched, though." "Right?" Reese didn't answer. Instead, he unwrapped the boot and set it near the fire. It was a quiet signal. Nothing was guaranteed anymore. That night, he doubled the guard shifts and made sure every weapon was within reach. He built 2 new traps, one a pressure-triggered deadfall of sharpened stones, the other a swinging pendulum made from a hollowed log and counterweight. They weren't elegant, but they would slow down anything that tried to breach the camp. He took the second watch again. The forest had changed. The usual sounds were gone. No birds, no insects. Only the distant trickle of water, and every so often the low hum of an unseen machine passing through the fog. Near the end of his watch, he saw her move. The shape wasn't one of his cadets. She was taller than the Eryxian, thinner than the Grelk, and moved too smoothly to be one of the drones. Reese didn't shout. He stepped away from the firelight and followed, spear in hand, footsteps silent. She moved through the trees like a shadow, never breaking a twig, never pausing to check if she was being followed. He stayed just close enough to see her outline. Then she stopped. In the center of a hollow, she turned slowly, revealing her face. She wasn't a cadet. She wore no academy suit. Her skin shimmered like polished obsidian, and her eyes glowed faintly blue. Not human, not any species Reese recognized. Her lips didn't move, but he heard her voice again, inside his head, exactly like the whisper from the previous night. "You're not like the others." He gripped his spear tighter. "Who are you?" Her eyes narrowed. "You will choose soon. Fight or abandon." Then she vanished. Not in a blur, not in a flicker of teleportation. One blink, and she was simply gone. No footprints, no heat trace. The clearing was empty. Reese didn't move for a long time. When he finally returned to camp, dawn was breaking. The others were awake. The fire had gone out. The Drenari was gone. The Eryxian was the first to speak. He left during the night. He didn't say anything. Reese looked at the empty space near the fire where the Drenari had always sat. No prints. No broken branches. Just absence. The Solari picked up the bone blade the Drenari had carved and held it in silence. Reese didn't say what he suspected, that the Drenari hadn't simply wandered off, that he had been taken, or perhaps lured. He didn't explain the encounter with the woman in the forest. Not yet. The others wouldn't believe him, not until something worse happened. So he sat by the fire, sharpened his spear in silence, and waited. He knew now that survival alone wouldn't be enough. Whatever was coming next had nothing to do with jungle predators or endurance trials. Something else had entered the simulation, and it was watching him more closely than ever. Reese spent the morning reinforcing silence. Every action he took, gathering sticks, checking traps, layering smoke charcoal over the perimeter, was done with deliberate control. He didn't look toward the spot where the Drenari had sat. The others had already accepted that absence as irreversible, and so had he. But what unsettled him wasn't the disappearance. It was the message. She hadn't threatened him. She hadn't even told him to act. But her words echoed, not with meaning, but with weight. "You will choose soon." Reese didn't believe in riddles. He believed in cause and consequence. That phrase wasn't philosophical, it was tactical. The Eryxian female followed him when he moved toward the eastern ridge. She said nothing until they reached a bluff overlooking the valley. Below them, half covered by mist and brush, was a metallic spire, camouflaged but unmistakably artificial. The size of a shuttle's dorsal antenna, it pulsed faintly with blue light. Neither of them had seen it before. Reese knelt and examined the terrain. No drones patrolled this section. No visible defenses. The signal tower, if that's what it was, stood too exposed, too careless, unless it wasn't meant to be hidden. She crouched beside him, her 4 eyes scanning. "You think that's how we're being watched?" He shook his head. "That's not surveillance, that's command." She looked at him. "What kind of command post is built where anyone can walk up to it?" He answered without looking up. "One that wants to be approached." She said nothing after that. Reese took a long stick and carved a path in the dirt, marking their camp's layout, current trap range, and the tower's distance. It was 2 clicks northeast, reachable in under an hour through dense brush. He wasn't sure what he'd do when he got there, but one fact had solidified in his mind. This wasn't just a survival exercise anymore. It was containment, or perhaps observation, not of the group, of him. Back at camp, the Grelk brothers had managed to build a crude but functional lookout platform using vines and broken logs. The Solari stood at the edge of it now, arms folded, weapon resting against his shoulder like a tribal war chief from a forgotten era. Reese approached him with the calm of someone past the point of uncertainty. "We're going to the tower," he said simply. The Solari didn't ask why. He nodded once and jumped down. Reese gave the Eryxian the signal, and she followed. The Grelk brothers hesitated. One stood, the other remained by the fire. Reese didn't wait. He led. The jungle didn't resist. That was the first warning. No traps triggered, no sounds stirred. Even the insects remained hidden. It was as if the entire forest had gone into standby mode. When they reached the tower, Reese circled it once. No guards, no drones. Just the hum of internal power and a single panel at its base glowing green. He reached out, and the light changed. Blue, then white. The surface rippled, and a doorway unfolded downward. The interior was sterile, cold, silver, humming with machinery. Inside, banks of monitors displayed live feeds, not just of the jungle, but of every cadet. Other teams, other sectors, some showed burning wreckage, others abandoned shelters. One screen flickered and then zoomed in on him. A voice came through the overhead speakers, clear, mechanical, and unrecognizable by gender. Subject, Reese Calder. Trial complete. The others stood frozen, staring at the screens. Reese's grip tightened on his spear. "No weapons necessary," the voice continued. "You are not in danger. Please enter the debrief chamber." He ignored the voice and looked at the largest screen. A top-down view showed the entire moon surface. Only 2 active cadets remained in motion, himself and the Erexian. The rest had either failed, been extracted, or disappeared. He spoke aloud, not to the machine, but to whatever was listening beyond the steel. What was the point of this? A pause. Then the voice returned. To assess leadership under isolation. Instinct under distortion. Cognitive resistance to artificial psychological interference. The Erexian stepped closer. This wasn't a team trial, it was a lab. "Yes," the voice confirmed. "Of the 112 cadets introduced across 5 sectors, only 2 maintained cognitive independence while sustaining functional group control. 1 led, 1 adapted. Both will be offered contract." Reese's jaw tensed. And the rest? Data. He turned away from the screens, face unreadable. Behind him, the Grelk brother stepped backward, visibly shaken. The Solari said nothing, but his fists clenched at his sides. The door to the next chamber opened with a hiss. A corridor beyond, brightly lit and pristine, waited without sound. The voice offered one last prompt. "You may return. Your results are complete. Your future status will be adjusted based on performance and willingness." Reese looked at the others. The Erexian stepped beside him, silent. The Solari remained a few paces back, frowning. One Grelk entered the corridor. The other fled into the trees. He turned one last time to the console. The screen zoomed in again, his own face staring back, marked by cuts, dirt, and firelight. He stepped through the doorway. The corridor led to a decontamination pod. Lights scanned his body. Medical drones cleaned the wounds on his arms. A new uniform was presented on a rotating rack, black, unmarked, without insignia. When he emerged, the jungle simulation was gone. He stood inside a clean steel hall with glass walls and a horizon of stars beyond. Above him, the insignia of a private Black Ops division gleamed in silver. A woman stood at the far end, not the one from the jungle. This one was real. Commander's stripes on her shoulder. No name tag. "You did better than expected," she said. Reese met her eyes. "You used real bodies in that forest." "We used real fear," she replied. And it worked. He said nothing. She tapped a control pad and a contract projection hovered in front of him. "You sign and you command your own unit. No restrictions, no questions, full operational autonomy, death rates included in the pay structure. You don't sign, and you're memory wiped, reassigned, and sent back as a civilian to some edge-world colony with 5 years of monitoring." Reese didn't look at the document. He looked at the reflection of his own face in the glass. He had built weapons from bone. Made fire from stone, fed others with his hands, fought with instinct, heard voices no one else had. He had survived not because he was trained to, but because he remembered what everyone else forgot, what it meant to be human without tools. He reached out and signed. The woman nodded once and turned away. He followed. Behind him the door closed. The forest, the fire, the silence, all vanished like smoke. The trial was over, but something deeper had been tested in those woods. Not just survival, human will, human choice. And Reese Calder had chosen.